Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chief Executive Officer of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, Kathryn Klaber.
Good morning. Welcome to Shale Insight 2013. I am Kathryn Klaber, Chief Executive Officer of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, which is proudly hosting this conference for its third consecutive year. Our approximately 300 member companies, led by our board of directors and our 20-plus committees and subcommittees, have worked very hard over the last year to make this conference a reality. Before we begin, as an industry focused on safety and security first and foremost, let's review some safety recommendations for both inside and external to the building. First, please display your conference badge at all times inside the convention center. It is a good idea to remove your badge when you leave the building. If an evacuation is required for any reason, an announcement will be made over the public address system advising everyone to proceed to the nearest exit. We have emergency medical services supporting the conference. If you have a medical emergency, please contact a security staff member for assistance. Likewise, if you have any concerns at all over the course of the conference about safety or security, please inform the closest security staff member. This conference would not be possible if not for the support of our members, including our board. We thank them for their leadership of our organization, and you will be hearing from several of them on the stage over the next 2 days. And on behalf of the entire coalition, I extend our deepest gratitude to David Spiegelmeyer for serving as our immediate past chair. Dave was at the table when the organization was begun, and we are thrilled he is with us here today in Philadelphia. Finally, thank you to our staff. They have each made a significant contribution to Shale Insight again this year. It is truly a team effort, ably directed once again by Helen Goodman, Sarah Smith, and Kim Chira. Our entire MSC team is talented and dedicated, and it has been my pleasure to work beside them over these last 4 years. As we begin Shale Insight 2013, let's take stock of how far we have come in such a short amount of time. MSC members produced 96% of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's shale gas in 2012, and Pennsylvania has emerged as a global force for natural gas development. Pennsylvania now produces 10% of the nation's natural gas and about 25% of America's onshore shale gas. Our midstream and pipeline companies are building and reinforcing an infrastructure to get this gas safely to market. And more downstream opportunities are emerging, from exports and power generation to manufacturing and transportation. Our challenge now is to keep pushing forward, doubling down on the advances we have made as an industry in recent years, improving upon our recommended practices, striving for operational excellence, making the economics work, and continually innovating. We certainly have some headwinds, not the least of which includes an onslaught of new regulations that are purportedly aimed at environmental protection, but all too often barriers to an industry that is already providing historic environmental benefits. But the MSC has risen to the occasion for the challenges at hand. Pennsylvania's economy depends on it, and the promise of our nation's energy security demands it. And here in Philadelphia, the challenges and opportunities are just as profound. Over the 3 years that we have hosted this conference here, we've seen positive changes in the landscape in southeastern Pennsylvania for our industry. Refineries that were mothballed now have new life. Consumer bills have dropped. Impact fee revenue is flowing. And public support for our work is rising, just as it is across all of Pennsylvania. Part of the reason we have gained a foothold here in Philadelphia is the Learn About Shale project, which has answered hundreds of real questions from real residents of the region with science and with facts. It has been authentic and sustained, and it has proven to be effective. And it has granted the industry a deeper appreciation among the civic community in greater Philadelphia, including the man set to formally welcome us here to this city. John Fry is Drexel University's 14th president, where under his leadership and guided by a 5-year strategic plan, Drexel is setting a new standard for cooperative education and becoming a force for economic development in greater Philadelphia. President Fry came to Drexel from Franklin and Marshall College, where as president, He was instrumental in the college's academic growth, campus and neighborhood development, and improved finances. From 1995 to 2002, he was Executive Vice President at the University of Pennsylvania, developing Penn's agenda for excellence. And before joining Penn, he was a higher education consultant. Mr. Fry is a graduate of Lafayette College and New York University's Stern School of Business, and he has been a trusted partner in our efforts as an industry and a coalition to make critical inroads in understanding and educating this vital part of the Commonwealth. We can't thank him enough for his collaboration with us and for joining us this morning. Please join me in welcoming Drexel University President John Fry.
Good morning, everyone. So I know that many of you have traveled from all over North America, both to attend this conference and in general to work on the Marcellus Shale. So let me extend a heartfelt welcome to our great city of Philadelphia. If you haven't spent much time here, let me say that this is one of America's greatest cities for its history, for the vibrancy and importance it has today, for its incredible future potential. I'm really delighted that the coalition has chosen to host the conference here, because Philadelphia will share the responsibility for what's being undertaken in the Marcellus Shale. This is a transformational initiative, and Philadelphia needs to play a greater role in that going forward. And in fact, what I'll argue today is that the long-term success of this initiative will depend to some extent on Philadelphia's partnership and willingness to support you. So I'm very glad to have the chance to speak with you today. Let me thank Randy Allen and the rest of the Marcellus Shale Coalition Board for showing leadership in an industry that's changing at a rapid pace and doing so under constant public scrutiny. I also want to acknowledge Katie Klaber's 4 years of outstanding work as the CEO of the coalition. I wish Katie the best of luck as she tackles future challenges. At the same time, it's hard to imagine that those challenges will hold a candle to what she's faced at the coalition. Looking at the second half of the last decade, the dominating facet of the landscape was the huge financial crisis brewing locally and nationally. And in our modern economy, any financial crisis can be construed ultimately as an energy crisis. Simultaneously, there was also a great leap forward in the energy industry's understanding of shale gas and the technological ability to go after it. Those factors combined to completely change the economic calculation around extraction. So in a vital and competitive industry like this, companies started moving fast. A critical mass of investment and effort went into finding and drilling for this resource. And it happened before there was a full and nuanced understanding of how to value the interest of every stakeholder: consumers, producers, contractors, landholders, local government, and most important, the communities in the shale play, and also those downstream, like here in Philadelphia. So that's the void that the coalition stepped into in 2009. I think the situation has stabilized tremendously since then, and the coalition played a big role in that. The voice of the industry, of course, is only one among the equally important voices in the debate over using this resource safely, effectively, and to the broadest societal benefit. But when that voice is clear and conscientious, when other stakeholders sense that there's a mutual accountability and responsibility among the players in the industry, then I think there's potential for a sensible conversation and real solutions. So I acknowledge your very hard work on that. Now, none of that is to say that there aren't many more questions to answer. I expect that addressing such questions is one of the primary reasons for having this gathering. And I want to take just a few minutes to discuss a question that matters to me. What is the role of Philadelphia and its major institutions, including Drexel University, in managing the change that has come to Pennsylvania and the nation? Here in Greater Philadelphia, we haven't leaned into our role in Marcellus Shale conversation as strongly as we should. Gas extraction is creating both economic opportunity and environmental risk in Pennsylvania. Our civic leaders owe it to the citizens of the region to make sure that Philadelphia shares in that value, and also that we argue for the mitigation of this risk. The benefits and costs of the Marcellus Shale initiative can be measured across a number of different dimensions, and each of those dimensions involves Philadelphia. In the short to medium term, there's a question of shale gas extraction as an industrial economic opportunity that drives jobs and growth, both directly and indirectly. One thing we've learned is how difficult it is to quantify those gains, both potential and those actually realized. But there are jobs and there is growth. Philadelphia is the economic engine of Pennsylvania, and we're well positioned to experience some of that growth. So let's take a look at the resources that Philadelphia brings to the table. We have the history and the capacity as the Northeast leading region for refining and for the chemical industry. We already serve as a critical node of the nation's energy and industrial transport system. Our port is world-class, and so is our rail system. We've processed a large majority of the crude from the Bakken Formation, and organizations like the Carlyle Group are investing heavily in businesses and transportation in our region. Philadelphia needs to engage fully with the Marcellus Shale initiative so that a fair share of the direct benefit of this work is realized locally and regionally. Because it's a fact that we are assuming a share of the environmental risk. It's estimated that 40 to 50% of our water supply originates in the Marcellus region. And with the need to transport frac liquid from drilling sites to treatment sites comes the risk of a potentially catastrophic accident affecting large numbers of people. So it would be irresponsible for this region not to make our voice heard. In the medium and longer terms, the importance of Marcellus Shale lies in the impact on the energy equation in America. There are obvious benefits from a potential increase in the energy produced domestically, but the impact of energy independence is not universally positive. We have to be mindful of how the new fossil fuel sources might adversely affect our nation's commitment to create a truly sustainable, renewable energy supply. So what's Philadelphia's role in figuring out how shale fits into the future? Well, I say this with great respect to our outstanding colleagues at Penn State who have already added major value to the discussion, as well as the strong universities in Pittsburgh and elsewhere. But Philadelphia remains the Commonwealth's leading concentration of academic talent and research capacity. So we can help address these key questions. We can research the environmental, economic, and legal issues. We can educate leaders for the energy field and prepare professionals in every field to understand the new energy landscape. Unconventional gas has implications that go well beyond the scope of producers and sellers. There are health questions. What it would mean for respiratory health if we can switch more major transportation fleets to cleaner natural gas. There are geopolitical questions. What would an energy-independent United States look like? And what would the consequences be for the regions of the world that are organized around producing energy? There are legal questions. How can the United States deal with maritime laws, for instance, that are nearly a century old in some cases and limit our ability to find and move energy? These are the questions that we have to answer as a society. It's not in anyone's interest, least of all yours, for the industry to claim that it can provide all of these answers. And one of the best academic ecosystems in the world is right here in Philadelphia, and we're ready to step in and to help. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about my own institution, Drexel University, but just as an example, we're building on strengths in engineering, science, public health, business, law, and medicine to create an interdisciplinary institute focused on energy and the environment. We're also developing a remarkable new project called the Innovation Neighborhood that will bring together our students and researchers, industrial research and development companies, and high-tech entrepreneurs on over 12 acres next to Philadelphia's 30th Street Station, the third busiest rail station in the United States. This will be the home for Drexel's Energy and Environment Institute. So we're making a big bet on what you're doing. Ultimately, the true crux of the value of the Marcellus Shale might lie in its potential to help restart United States manufacturing. Energy has kept the United States uncompetitive in manufacturing for decades because of its scarcity and the volatility in its markets. Abundant, reliable energy creates an incredible opportunity to spark new manufacturing. And there are few places better positioned to be the best case than Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the workshop of the world well into the 20th century. We felt the sting of the decline of the American manufacturing enterprise deeply. We've made great inroads lately in high-tech and information industries and in building one of the world's greatest centers of education and medicine. But imagine if we could leverage the power of this amazing location and city, the transportation infrastructure I described, a wealth of brownfield sites that could easily be repurposed, and now a reliable, competitively priced source of cleaner energy. That's the vision of Mayor Michael Nutter's Manufacturing Task Force, and that's what they're pursuing. I'm really bullish on this prospect, and energy will be one of the key determinants to the success of this effort. How will society ultimately weigh the trade-offs involved in shale gas? It's going to depend on how the value proposition measures up to the perceived costs. That goes far beyond shareholder value. Your companies may be profitable, responsible, and outstanding corporate citizens, but that's not the level at which the question will ultimately be judged. And it goes beyond the value for individual landholders and even for citizens and communities who now find it possible to get jobs in the short term because of the gas fields. Where the crux of the cost-benefit analysis lies in the ability of shale gas to contribute to a stable, affordable, and reliable energy picture in America, the effect of such a vision on the prospects for a manufacturing revival in the United States, and in the belief that this energy source can be tapped successfully without having a negative impact on the quality of life for people in their communities. No one wins when forms of energy are set against each other. Shale gas needs to be seen as a component of a national energy strategy. That strategy must account for every type of energy we have the potential to use, and it must work on near, middle, and long-term timeframes simultaneously. As an industry, you need to connect to this overall strategy, and that's something that Philadelphia's academic and policy leaders are ready to work with you to help make possible. So I thank you for your time this morning. I hope you have a fruitful conference and a great time in Philadelphia. Welcome.
Thank you, President Fry, and we look forward to a growing partnership in the years to come. Joining me next on stage are my peers who are leading state trade-based organizations and associations in key basins across the country. The purpose of this conversation, sponsored by Chesapeake Energy, is to highlight the similarities the Appalachian Basin shares with these other regions of the country, shed light on key differences, and gain a better sense of how our work across geographic boundaries is emboldening economic growth, environmental protection, and energy security for the United States. I would like to introduce our panelists here on the stage. Teddy Carter, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Texas Independent Producers and Royalty Owners Association. Teddy joined TIPRO as Director of Public Affairs in June 2010 after serving for over a decade at the Texas Senate in various roles. Since joining TIPRO, he has successfully guided its membership through 2 contentious legislative sessions. Mr. Carter received his bachelor's degree from Texas State University. Next is Carrie Bierke-Cutting, Vice President of the North Dakota Petroleum Council. A native North Dakotan, Ms. Cutting has 25 years of experience in the North Dakota energy industry in fields as diverse as sales, marketing, transportation, and technology. Carrie earned a Master's of Science in Management from Minot State University and a Bachelor of Science from the University of North Dakota. Slated to join us was Tisha Schuler, President of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. Due to the severe flooding in Colorado, however, she is unable to be with us today, and our thoughts certainly remain with her and all of her colleagues and our compatriots in Colorado. Joining us in her place is Mike Paulus, Senior Staff Regulatory Advisor for MSC member company WPX Energy. He has over 30 years of experience in environmental, health and safety, and regulatory affairs in the upstream and downstream oil and gas industry as an employee and consultant to major and large independent companies. His professional experience includes serving as an exploration geologist, hydrogeologist, refinery environmental coordinator, project manager, regional environmental health and safety manager, and regulatory affairs advisor. He has a particularly strong grasp on the regulatory and economic climate in Colorado, and as a leader at KOGA, we thank him and all of our panelists for joining us here today. So now we're going to have an intimate conversation, the 4 of us, with a couple thousand of our closest friends. What we're going to do this morning to really kick off these 2 days of very in-depth issues is give you an overview, both of what's going on in each of our respective states, very exciting shale basins in the U.S. right now, but also explore some of the individual issues that have similarities in how we're operating across our states, but also have some very unique identifiers depending on the geology and the landscape. So I'm going to start with just a brief introduction about where we are in Pennsylvania. As many of you in the room know, we're not more than a decade into this. In fact, it's really been the last several years in which the production in Pennsylvania has put us among the big boys in the country. And last year we hit 2 trillion cubic feet of gas, way surpassing the amount needed by Pennsylvania, consumed by Pennsylvania. So as a net exporter, we're on track to be over 3 TCF in 2013. Pennsylvania sits right again as a keystone state in the middle of the Marcellus, the 95,000 square miles, the 5 states, each with a very different landscape for operation. We all know the story of New York, and the fact that New York has chosen not to go forward has really, in fact, highlighted all the benefits even more in Pennsylvania. And really, the only folks who've not benefited from that are those rural landowners right across the Pennsylvania-New York border. Similarly with Maryland and with the Delaware River Basin Commission, entities that have not yet made that decision to go forward. But in Pennsylvania, there are some very important issues that I believe, as President Fry mentioned, we have behind us. It's well understood that the economic impact we're having is real and significant. 240,000 people who can attribute their jobs in Pennsylvania to the oil and gas industry. We've really, I think, gotten over that concern about not hiring local and not having this be sustainable. We have a local supply chain now. A lot of companies, many of those of you in the room, are part of that supply chain here in the Marcellus. And we've addressed issues of major concern to communities, such as roads, spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the last few years in order to repair and rebuild roads to make both safe operations and the least impact to the local communities. There are still lots of challenges, as you will hear over the next few days. The regulatory climate is on overdrive. We are awaiting a very important state Supreme Court decision that will dictate how this industry can operate in what is an incredibly fractured state with 67 counties and thousands of municipalities, and in fact hundreds of ordinances that right now we believe are not compliant and are problematic for our industry. But you know, a lot of things to talk about in the next few days, and I hope that was a good first overview of where we are right here, right now in Pennsylvania. So would you like, Teddy, to talk a little bit next about the great state of Texas?
Sure. I appreciate it. Thank you for putting this on and for having me. I really, this is pretty impressive. I'm Teddy Carter. We were, for those of you, I'm with TIPRO. For those of you that don't know who TIPRO is, we're statewide trade. We've been in existence since 1946. We've since then grown to over 2,500 members, made up of spanning the size chart from largest publicly traded independents down to the smallest mom and pop producers that can be found. Our recent president has two employees. He likes to say he has two employees. It's him and his wife. And if you call his company, that's who answers the phone. So, but it's a great thing to be here. When you ask a Texan to talk about Texas, it tends to roll some. I'm told by my out-of-state friends that their eyes just automatically roll because they get so tired of hearing from Texans how proud they are of their state. But we're to put it modestly, Texas is doing very well in the oil and gas industry right now. We are producing at some of the top levels in the country. We're blessed with a regulatory body that's been at this for over 100 years, and they understand that they continue to uphold their mission of protecting the environment, being stewards of the resources, and while still allowing producers to seek and produce the assets that we're all after. I think that some of you may have heard from Texas leadership making trips to other states and talking about how our state is thriving and economically, and how we are job creators and come to Texas. And I think that too often left out of those conversations, I think it should be shouted from the mountaintop every time any economic success of Texas is talked about, is the contributions of the oil and gas industry. It is unquestionable that Texas would not see the economic success that it has seen were it not for the oil and gas industry. And it's in large part due to the oil and gas industry. If you were looking at the slides here a minute ago, Texas producers we've built what's going to be projected to be a $12 billion rainy day fund. So we've put almost at this point, I think it's around 8 to 10 billion, and by 2015 it's going to be a $12 billion piggy bank for the state. That has gone to all the rainy day funds used for all manners of things: criminal justice, education. The state uses that to help survive, and the amount that's the piggy bank. And then tax revenues we've sent last year. We sent another $12 billion to the state and local governments. So it is a blessing to be in a state where I feel like I'm part of the home team, because our legislators get it for the most part. Whether or not they shout it from the mountaintops like I'd like them to, they understand that at the end of the day, we cannot do without this industry. And I think that it'd be a wise thing if more states followed that example. I mean, it is an industry that can be operated correctly and safely, and should be embraced.
Great. Well, Teddy, thanks for that overview. Gary, certainly your industry's had in North Dakota a huge impact on the tax revenue and it's been transformational. Tell us a little bit about North Dakota.
Well, thank you, Katie. I really appreciate being here today and visiting with all of you. North Dakota, 10 years ago when I traveled around the country and I would tell people I was from North Dakota, they would say, "Ooh, cold, how can you live there?" Now when I say I'm from North Dakota, they say, energy, jobs, economy. We have people that are coming to North Dakota from all over the country trying to escape the recession and finding jobs and being able to start a new life. Save for college education, save for retirement, and we're glad that they have come because we're a small state, 700,000 total population in the state. And North Dakota has now become the second largest oil producer in the nation, right behind Texas. It would take a lot for North Dakota to catch up with Texas, and that's not our goal. But we're now producing 870,000 barrels of oil a day. We're looking at reaching 1 million barrels of oil per day by the end of the year. And what also comes along with that oil is natural gas and natural gas liquids, which were not necessarily expected to be in that quantity. And that also creates some challenges. North Dakota doesn't have a lot of infrastructure, and we'll be talking about that further on in this panel. So roads, pipelines, we have one refinery in the state of North Dakota. There are 2 small refineries that are being built. So the majority of this resources that are extracted in oil and gas have to be moved across the country to find homes, to find markets, and that's a challenge in itself. The oil and gas industry in North Dakota contributes $30 billion to the state's economy, and that's in 2011 figures. North Dakota is still predominantly an ag state, and the agriculture contributes $35 billion to the state. But the taxes from the oil and gas industry are $2.6 billion. And there's a lot of sales tax. We just see the economy in North Dakota growing. It's the most robust economy in the nation. In the last 12 months, we've seen 13.4% growth in GDP. And part of what we go through is with a legislature that only meets every other year, by the time they get the figures, by the time they get the figures of growth and what's being contributed and the amount of money that is going to be available for them to appropriate, the figures have changed. And so North Dakota ends up with a surplus. This may happen in Texas as well. It's kind of a misnomer, but the current expected surplus in this biennium is $1.6 billion. North Dakota also created a legacy fund when you talk about your rainy day fund, and that has $500 million in it currently and is growing in leaps and bounds. And that makes the citizens of North Dakota very happy because this is essentially the 3rd oil boom that has occurred in North Dakota, and the previous 2 went bust. And so the citizens are very concerned that this be a long-term contribution to the economy in North Dakota, and we certainly believe that it will be. We're looking at a very long time before that 9,000 current wells becomes the anticipated 45,000 well number that we believe it will in the next couple of decades. So thank you again, Katie.
Great overview. How about Colorado?
How about Colorado?
Lots going on there, too.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to represent the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. Everyone here is missing out on the vibrancy of Tisha Schuler. She's a tremendous speaker, but unfortunately, again, due to the flood, she was unable to be here. But I'm glad to fill in for her, but I wanted to start off with a little historical perspective. Colorado also has a long history of oil and gas production. In fact, the first oil field was discovered in Florence in 1881, and that was mostly because seeps were in the area. The Boulder oil field was discovered 20 years later in 1901, and it was reportedly discovered by a driller that's using a dowsing rod.
Now here we are 100 years later, and we're talking about shale formations and oil and gas production. Well, those two oil fields were produced from the Pierre Shale because of fractures in the anticlinal structure. So I just find it's somewhat ironic that we're still talking about, shale formations, but when you think about the technology, it's advanced a lot farther than a dowsing rod. Obviously, directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing is revolutionizing oil and gas development in the U.S. and I suspect the world. So it's important that we understand, how much of a role this technology plays. So when you look at oil and gas production in Colorado, it's mostly from 6 geologic basins. We don't have just one large basin in our state. Also, about not quite half the state is federal lands. Obviously, when you think of Colorado, you think of national parks and forests and Pikes Peak and skiing and all the recreational opportunities outdoors. So we have a very significant federal lands present in our state, and that is driving a lot of the environmental analyses that are being required under NEPA. In 2012, oil production in Colorado reached a new high that hadn't been achieved in almost 55 years, back to 1957, where we're up to now 50 million barrels. And most of that is due to the recent play in the Niobrara Shale for oil along the Front Range of Colorado, where there's been a lot of active drilling in the last 3 to 5 years. I think Colorado is rated 9th in the U.S. for oil production. In terms of natural gas production, it's 5th in terms of the states. 2012, natural gas production is roughly 1.65 trillion cubic feet. Now, most of that is occurring from the Piceance Basin, from CBM plays in the Raton and San Juan basins, and also from the Denver-Julesburg field along the Front Range. In 2012, oil and gas production in Colorado was valued at over $9 billion. So we're seeing, sustained production value, revenue base that is being balanced now between both gas and oil production. And one thing that's also somewhat unique about, Denver is obviously it's a regional hub for oil and gas activity throughout the Rockies. So we have, additional employment and activity focused in Denver that covers many states, including, North Dakota and Wyoming, Montana, Utah, etc. So I think it's a great place to somewhat be on the front lines of all the issues that we're dealing with. And as you know, given the environmental attitudes of Colorado and just all that we value in our great outdoors, we have a strong interest in our activities. And you'll notice that there's a lot of studies that have been conducted in Colorado, whether it's at the federal level, the state level, or in some cases, some of the local governments are very active in looking at the concerns related to potential impacts of water quality, water usage, air quality, wildlife impacts, and obviously the socioeconomic impacts and benefits as well. So a lot of these studies are being conducted in cooperation with federal, state, and local governments, academic institutions, operators, and environmental groups. One other thing I wanted to just mention in the opening remarks was, we experienced a boom in natural gas development nearly 10 years ago that was mostly focused on the western slope in the Piceance Basin and San Juan basins. And since then, there have been several significant rulemakings that have come out of Colorado. And those rulemakings have focused on improved site assessments of oil and gas locations, VOC emission controls, including green completions. We've been doing those voluntarily and some operators back to 2002. Stormwater management, we have state programs in Colorado for oil and gas construction activity. Pit design, construction and closure, soil and groundwater cleanup standards have been revised and updated. Obviously, wildlife protection has been a great focus of rulemaking. We've even had some rules looking at the distinction between tributary and non-tributary, water designation to try to prove that your produced water is not feeding a nearby stream. Most of you are probably familiar with the hydraulic fracturing chemical disclosure. We've also had rules on groundwater monitoring here recently, and we just concluded earlier this year rules on setbacks from occupied buildings and outdoor activity areas. Currently, we're focused on rules that are being considered related to fugitive invented emissions, including methane. And we're also looking at T-norm, or technically enhanced natural occurring radioactive material. So we're finding Colorado is very fulfilling right now in terms of challenges and opportunities, but it's still a great place to live.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a very active regulatory environment, and I think all the programs over the next few days and yesterday's workshops are a testament to that. And Mike, you raised an important point about these studies. We've been talking about how we've got to get that much more coordinated on our individual states' reaction to these studies, because it's no longer that a study that may be focused on Wyoming or Colorado or Pennsylvania doesn't have impacts in each of our basins. Another issue that is incredibly important that I think we'd like to move to next is about water. Water management and water itself is obviously integral to any energy source, and it's certainly been a focus of regulators, of the public, and of the technologies that we're deploying. In Pennsylvania, I think we have a good story to tell on water. Unlike some of your states, we don't have the challenges on the supply side. We certainly have some very restrictive requirements on how we manage that and eventually dispose of that water. One of the issues that you'll see a lot of attention to over the course of this conference is on private water wells. We are one of only 2 states in the country that have no private water well standards and have 1.2 million people that are depending on that in Pennsylvania out of our 23 million or 12.7 million population. So a significant reliance on private water wells that, regardless of whether oil and gas were operating, there are challenges to the quality of that water. So working very hard to get the data out there, to use the risk management that the industry is doing as really a public health benefit to inform residents of what those pre-existing conditions are. From a water sourcing standpoint, with the exception of some low flow conditions in late summer that we have to work around, we've got some great water sourcing options, and in fact even more that we're hoping to refine in terms of using mine-influenced water as a source for hydraulic fracturing, and then the recycling that we've really gotten way ahead of in the last few years in Pennsylvania, with many operators recycling 100% of that flowback water and quite a bit of additional recycling throughout the water supply chain. Underground injection, which is an important option for water management. Pennsylvania finds itself as the only state here in the region that does not have state primacy on permitting underground injection wells. Perhaps as a result of that, we only have a handful of them here, and are working. Our members use often the disposal capacities in adjoining states in order to manage some of that water that can't be recycled for logistics or other operational reasons. But we've also got an incredible amount of innovation among the MSC member companies, a lot of the folks exhibiting here today, and frankly the calls that we probably get daily into the MSC office of someone having the next best way of dealing with water and driving those costs down is obviously of big interest and importance to our members. So that's just a little bit about what's going on with water in Pennsylvania, having been a part of the MSC's commitment even before there were any requirements along these lines to not dispose of any water into the Commonwealth's public waterways, and now we've got requirements that are very, very strict along those lines, and it's been a privilege to be kind of out ahead of the curve on water's issues related to water management. So why don't we start with you, Mike? Water in Colorado, challenges, opportunities.
Well, as they say, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting in Colorado. But yes, there are a lot of concerns related to water usage in Colorado. And there have been some recent studies looking at oil and gas usage around, I think, 6.5 billion gallons, which represent less than 1/10 of 1% of the total water use in Colorado. But I think we need to be clear when we talk about water use and water consumption are not the same thing. And there's a lot of concerns about the water used in hydraulic fracturing is being taken out of the near-term human hydrologic cycle when it's being retained in the shale formations. So there's a greater, I guess, promotion of recycling what produced water we have. And in the Piceance Basin, we're able to recycle our water because we use slick water fracs, and that produced water isn't as saline as you have with some of the other shale formations. And a lot of the major operators, including WPX, have pioneered their technology so that all the water we use for hydraulic fracturing is from produced water. So that's really causing less of a strain on demand for fresh water sources. One other thing that we're promoting is water sharing agreements between operators. So obviously you only need water if you're actively drilling and fracking. And if you're a company that's not active, you have water typically from your production operations, and those companies that need that water for their active operations are allowed to borrow that water, use it. There is no financial transaction. We're just managing it as a kind of a shared resource.
And so the regulators are supporting that?
Yes, we did that through an active engagement with the COGCC in Colorado. So water is being studied carefully in terms of the governor has asked for a Colorado water plan by multiple agencies. I think he's asking for a draft by the end of the year, and once that finalized in 2014, and oil and gas will be part of that discussion.
Great. How about you, Carrie? Water in North Dakota.
Water in North Dakota. Well, supply is not an issue. What is an issue is that sometimes the supply is far removed from the locations it's needed, so transportation is a bit of an issue. Maybe not an issue in moving the water as much as the citizens of North Dakota tell us that one of their main concerns are traffic, roads and truck traffic. And so anything that can be done to move those trucks off the road is an advantage to the public opinion of the industry. So supply, not an issue. What we do find is that now that the land leases are secure in North Dakota for the most part, that the industry is moving to the efficiency phase, and so they are looking very closely at ways that they can recycle and reuse water. There's now a study going on at the University of North Dakota Energy and Environmental Research Center actually on how produced water and frack water can be recycled and reused, and a huge push to do that. We also find that wherever you are creating a hole in technology, that there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are willing to come in from across the country and fill that niche. So the creativity that's out there in bringing solutions for water management to our state are just, it's amazing and an exciting time in North Dakota, even if we consider this recycle and reuse phase of water to be in its infancy. North Dakota does have state primacy on underground injection wells. We have a large number of them, and they work well for the most part. We do see some issues with underground injection well operation, generating a lot of filter socks and norm issues and that disposal of those filter socks. This gets into another realm, but North Dakota does not have permitted special waste landfills to handle T-norm waste.
Hence why you went yesterday to the T-norm workshop.
That's exactly right.
What about water conveyances. I know some of our members have put in some innovative, new ways of managing those transportation issues, and we've got pipeline companies partnering with water companies to transfer that water by pipeline instead of truck. Is that a viable option, or the distance is just too great in North Dakota?
It is in some cases, and you're right that in a lot of cases the distances are too great. But wherever it is practical, it is being done and being put in place. We have a lot of well pads as we're moving to infield drilling that will be completely pipelined, water, product, water in, product out. And so that's the ideal situation.
Yeah. Teddy, how about water in Texas?
Well, on the quantity side, very similar to what Mike said, the oil and gas industry uses relatively very little water statewide. We've got the Texas Water Development Board puts it at a little less than 1% of the state's water use. But now that said, we've also got a state water plan that has been updated, I think 2 or 3 times now, maybe longer than that. But the way that works is there are groundwater management districts across the state. There's 99, I think, right now, maybe a couple more than that. They evaluate their water supply and their future water needs, and look at their future growth and all that. All those reports funnel up to the Texas Water Development Board, who develops the state water plan. And the state water plan for a while now has said that, and the plan is for I think it's a 50-year plan. Has said that by 2020 or something like that, if Texas doesn't start putting some new water infrastructure projects in place, water supply projects in place, that we're going to start being without an adequate source of water in times of drought, which seems like is all the time in Texas. We're in drought right now. So when you're talking about water supply, it only carries you so far, in my opinion, to say we use less than 1% when you have a report saying we're going to run out of water. The problem with the water plan is until you put money behind funding the construction of those infrastructure projects, it's just a plan. And so thus far it's been just a plan. It's had a couple injections here and there of cash. This past legislative session, the legislature finally realized that the longer we put this off, the higher the price tag gets to complete it. Some of these infrastructure projects, like for example a reservoir, if you're going to build a reservoir, from first shovel turn to supplying water is about a 30-plus year process. So if you're not building them now, you're too late. So we needed to put some money into it. The legislature this year put in place a fund, a perpetual fund, a revolving fund that will allow the state to loan out money to communities to begin these infrastructure projects and get things going. So the good news is the plan has money. Guess where they got the money from to jumpstart it? Their rainy day fund, which is oil and gas money. But we were happy to support that, and we're really excited that that's going forward. So on the supply side, yes, water is for fighting, but we are trying to take steps to ensure that there will be adequate supplies. And as far as what the oil and gas industry is doing, echo a lot of what they're saying. I mean, where it can be done, recycle, reuse is being done. One of the big messages we carried to the legislature this past session was, we didn't, people have talked about should the state offer incentives for recycling? We don't really. We didn't go. TIPRO did not go and ask for any incentives, but we did ask that they not mandate water recycling, because that is a dangerous road to go down, because you hand someone a water recycling mandate, and they are focused on trying to meet that mandate rather than trying to find, which are all the companies are doing currently, trying to find the next best thing and the next way to do it better. And you let that free market work, and the companies are going to find the better way to do it.
I think we can all agree on that. Absolutely. On this panel, right? Absolutely. Well, a lot of common themes here. You talk about funding these issues. The recent impact fee in Pennsylvania, one of the dozen uses of that impact fee is for transportation uses, and some communities are earmarking those dollars for that outcome. But all of water tends to also be discussed in terms of infrastructure, and you've already all hit on infrastructure in some way, but I think it's worthy of a few minutes. The infrastructure, whether it be the road use, the midstream, gathering infrastructure, of which we are several, hundreds of wells still waiting, on that infrastructure. And then we also have those transportation funding issues. Pennsylvania has 23,000 state-owned bridges, and over 1,000 have been deemed structurally deficient, which has a serious impact on how the industry can chart the most efficient paths from point A to point B. And so, all those infrastructure issues come to bear, especially in a place here in Philadelphia, where we're bringing a lot of this resource here, not just from the Pennsylvania and the Utica in Pennsylvania and Ohio, but from the Bakken as well. So, Carrie, maybe you want to start off with infrastructure, because I think you've been right on the cutting edge of some of the most important issues.
Well, infrastructure, let's talk about roads for a minute. Being a rural and predominantly agricultural state, North Dakota had essentially farm-to-market roads. They were not industry grade, and I think that can be a common theme here too in the areas where there's a lot of activity. You don't have roads that can sustain the kind of truck traffic that's required to propel the industry forward at the pace that it wants to move. So there's a lot of money being spent in western North Dakota on upgrading the roads from these farm-to-market roads to more of an industry-grade road. Huge number of dollars there. Even though the industry is giving the economy in North Dakota a huge boost, it's not sufficient to cover all of the needs of those roads. Pipeline infrastructure, you mentioned being behind on gas gathering. That is a major issue in North Dakota right now. As most of you know, there's a considerable amount of flaring that goes on in North Dakota due to not having enough gas gathering lines. That's a huge percentage of it. There's also a piece of that comes from inadequate infrastructure being in place. Where pipelines were put in very quickly, in some cases they're undersized and not able to handle the volume of gas that's being generated. So that's also a factor. In addition, the citizens of North Dakota, through the Petroleum Council's Public Perception Survey, also tell us that their other concern besides roads and traffic is housing. There isn't sufficient housing to accommodate all of the new employees that are coming to the state and prevent the kind of rent escalation that has an impact on the citizens that have been there for a long time. So those are our major infrastructure issues in our state.
It's almost a victim of your success in not having the capacity to carry the prolific resource. So, Mike, how about Colorado and infrastructure?
Well, certainly with the recent floods, we're hurting for infrastructure in some of the affected counties where a lot of bridges and roads have been severely damaged. And in other parts of the state, which we, pretty mountainous, we're faced with some dilemmas in that a lot of the existing roads are along canyons or streams. And yet, we don't want to create new roads and add to additional disturbance. And so it's very costly sometimes to improve those roads given the difficult terrain that you're working under. But what we're finding it's very effective is to use temporary pipelines to transfer our produced water, or even allow the gathering of oil and produced water down to a centralized tank battery. So those are some of the the practices that are being used to reduce the amount of truck traffic and wear and tear on the roads as well. Another, I guess, part of the infrastructure that I wanted to touch on, and I guess it depends on your regulatory requirements, is the demand for landfills in some of the E&P waste, and especially drill cuttings. Drill cuttings hauled off to a landfill takes up a lot of valuable landfill space. Certainly some of that volume can be used effectively as waste cell cover, which is needed for landfill operations. But I think if we're going to require that, we really need to think carefully about, is that best use of our landfills, and is there other beneficial uses for drill cuttings, including using it as subgrade fill at our reclamation of our oil and gas locations. One other thing I just wanted to kind of promote that you can work with your county landfills is it's a great opportunity to also recycle some of your scrap metal, some of the plastics that we generate just from the drill pipe end caps that protect the threads. You'd be surprised as how much volume can be recycled, and if you can work with your county landfill to at least have a staging area to essentially accumulate those types of waste, you'll find that some of the recycling companies would be interested in working on an agreement, being able to transport those wastes.
Good. We have time for one last question. We'll start with Teddy here on downstream opportunities. I mean, you're where so much of the refining capacity is in the country, and yet here we have in Philadelphia, refineries that are starting to, as I mentioned in my opening comments, see new life because of the products, from all of our work. Downstream opportunities that you feel are being taken full advantage of right now to use these products, and where do you think we're falling behind and we need to pick up the pace?
Well, I mean, it goes without saying that with the amount of natural gas that's being produced and that's available to us, it just makes sense to go the way of increasing our natural gas use. Texas, two legislative sessions ago, put in place what's called the Clean Transportation Triangle, and what that program does is it allows some existing monies in the Texas Emissions Reduction Program to go toward construction of natural gas refueling stations in the triangle between Dallas, San Antonio, Houston. And it's kind of we've been struggling with chicken or the egg on CNG vehicles, and so we're trying to get in place whatever that one is, whatever fuel refueling is, the chicken or the egg, trying to get one of them in place so that we can hopefully increase the natural gas vehicle use. Fleet conversions are happening at record rates in Texas because of the same program. Companies can get grants based on converting fleets to natural gas. So we're trying to go that route. There's been some efforts to increase natural gas generation that haven't quite got the foothold that we'd like, but we're working on it. But those are the two main thrusts of where Texas is trying to head is generation and increased use in generation and vehicular use.
Yeah, and the air quality benefits. A lot of non-attainment areas can benefit from it, and I know in Colorado you've looked at all sorts of ways of using this fuel to benefit that as well.
Yes, and we're finding that we need to practice what we preach. We're seeing more conversions of drill rigs to natural gas from diesel, and some of the pump engines for hydraulic fracturing treatments are also being powered by field gas now, and certainly that helps when you're working in non-attainment areas. And as Teddy mentioned, we're also seeing that there's greater conversion of fleet vehicles that return to base to a central fueling station make a lot of sense. And we already have a lot of hybrid public transportation with buses at DIA, the 16th Street Mall, Boulder, that are already running on natural gas. So we'd like to see that promoted as well.
How about North Dakota?
North Dakota is also moving in that direction. It's just a little bit in the beginning stages of that. The wellhead gas is wet, and so it becomes a two-phase process. But here again, you get back to that hole that's created for innovation and the entrepreneurs that are moving in. And so we're seeing companies moving in with compression units to separate the liquids, at the same time seeing that CNG in a box, which can become that portable refueling station and provide the chicken so that the fleets can start being converted. And we see that as a big move in the near future.
Right. I wanted to mention just an update on, I said 2 sessions ago we put that program in place. This last session it was also enhanced to add on because of recognition that this is something that the state wants to invest in. They've added on additional qualifying grant items, and one of them is near any non-attainment area if the environmental agency in our state deems that if you're near enough to possibly affect air quality in a non-attainment area, there are grants for drilling, completion equipment, production that convert. If you convert to natural gas, you're eligible for a grant.
Well, that's certainly a commonality, that those conversions of both the drilling and the hydraulic fracturing equipment and using that wellhead gas where possible. And as President Fry talked about, the manufacturing sector seeing tremendous cost savings, and the recent study out of the National Association of Manufacturers really reinforced what's going on in the country. We are needing to wrap up this panel, but I thought one way to finish off was to do a poll here of 4 of the most active shale basins, shale states in the country, and see, after you've heard some of these similarities, certainly some of the differences that we see even within an individual state on the geology and the local issues. Maybe it's important to take a poll and see, what do you think about state regulations versus the feds coming in and taking over regulations of oil and gas? If you look at the membership of your organizations, do you think we ought to keep these regulations with the states, or is it time to hand it all over to the feds?
Do we really need to answer? I mean, you got to go with the states. I mean, they know what their state. The state regulatory agencies know the state, and they know what's best for them, and there's no one-size-fits-all that can work.
That's emphatic, Teddy. How about you, Carrie?
Absolutely. I would state the same. No size fits all. And there's similarities, but there's enough differences that the locals are aware of that it makes sense to keep it at the state level.
Great. Colorado?
We don't need additional duplication and burden with no benefit. So the states are the way to go.
Yeah. On behalf of the MSC members in here in Pennsylvania, we've worked long and hard to get state regulations to be where they need to be to effectively govern this exciting development, and we think that's where it needs to stay. And we'll certainly be exploring all these issues, state, federal, and otherwise, throughout the next several days. So thank you all. I'm going to do some closing comments from the podium, but it's been a real thrill to have your perspectives with us here to kick off the conference this morning. So that was hopefully got you thinking about many of the issues that apply not only here in the Marcellus, Utica, Appalachian Basin, but really across our great country. It's been a very informative discussion, and we thank all of our panelists for setting the stage for a lively and fast-paced 2-day conference here in Philadelphia. Before we depart, I really want to draw your attention and pleased to announce that Shale Insight has once again gone mobile by offering Shale Insight 2013, a free mobile app which provides up-to-date program details, the ability to connect with fellow attendees, to plan your conference itinerary, review speaker bios and exhibitor lists, complete session surveys, and so much more. You should have received a card at registration. Looks like this. Looks like a cell phone with instructions on how to begin using the app. Please download it. It's an incredibly exciting tool, and those who used it last year gave us tremendous feedback. I want to thank MSC member Percheron for sponsoring the mobile app again this year. And at this time, I'd like to remind conference attendees that we will now move to Exhibit Hall E on the 2nd floor for a networking and a refreshment break. On display in the hall is the Technology Showcase, sponsored by MSC member company Sumitomo Corporation of America, and the Natural Gas Use Poster Sessions, sponsored by America's Natural Gas Alliance. At 10:45 a.m., we will have our first Insight sessions of this conference. Please refer to your program or the Shale Insight mobile app for details on those many exciting sessions. And we will see everyone back here in the main ballroom at noon for lunch and a keynote presentation from ExxonMobil Chemical Company President Steve Pryor and Mark West Energy Partners Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer John Mollenkoff. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your morning.